As expected from these two, the drama already began to intensify before the match. The media was all buzzing to see a rematch. With that came a lot of interviews where both of the players had a lot to say. Hans, as usual, sounded very confident in his ability, a little too confident.
If he loses to me, I don't think he can show his face in another tournament again.
Do you think he will lose to you?
Yeah, of course, because I already broke him once. He can't handle the intensity.
After you beat Magnus, as you think you will, where does your chess go from there?
I'll just become world champion, hopefully, because I'll get all the invitations. Maybe I'll get some more sponsors, and even if I don't get invitations, I'll just organize my own tournaments, maybe my own world championship.
Magnus, on the other hand, kept things a bit more relaxed.
Chess speaks for itself.
And Magnus responded with the name Lance Stephenson. If you don't know anything about the NBA, Lance Stephenson is known for being entertaining and for getting under his opponent's skin, notably trying to do so against LeBron James. Everything seemed to be pointing to what would be the match of the year. Despite Hans being a rising star over the past couple months in the chess community, Magnus was still by a landslide the overwhelming favorite to win the match. In my poll, 93% of you guys chose Magnus to win, and Chess.com's broadcast gave him an 83% chance of winning. Not only was he one of the greatest chess players of all time, but the Speed Chess Championship was his backyard. He dominated this format for years, winning 3 out of the 5 tournaments he participated in. But unlike past events, the semi-finals and finals of this one had a unique element to it: a crowd. It had been a struggle to pull off in the past due to concerns on how it may affect the game. This year, however, noise-canceling headphones, music, and new measures make it possible. As said by Carlsen before the match, spectators don't really shut up when watching chess, so the hype they could provide would be incredible in what could be an intense matchup. Magnus Carlsen emerges with a smirk on his face as the crowd chants his name. Moments later, Hans comes out, to a slightly less enthusiastic reception with a bit more of a serious look on his face. In front of the sold-out e-spot in Paris, France, the players sit directly facing each other, ready to fight. The tension in the room was palpable. Regardless of the past, the matchup had been set in stone. The two grandmasters, who despised each other, were set to battle it out. And they got underway, as Magnus played pawn to b3 to begin. Early on, Magnus would elect to double fianchetto his bishops over developing alternate pieces just like Hans. The evaluation bar remained fairly unbroken throughout the middle game, before Hans started playing very strong defensively and even gained a slight advantage. Impressing so far, Hans actually stood a strong chance at winning. The tension in the match was real, and doubts were building in everyone's mind about who would really win this match. However, attempting to maintain his momentum, Niemann launched an attack with pawn to b5, involuntarily trapping his own rook. And with a large advantage following that, Magnus would make quick work of Hans to pick up a victory in the first game. And as all other matches in the Speed Chess Championship, this one was composed of 3 different parts: 90 minutes of 5-minute blitz games, then 60 minutes of 3-minute blitz games, and finished off by 30 minutes of 1-minute bullet games. The match was definitely far from over, and with no delay, the pair would enter their next game. This time with white, Hans elected to play the standard Italian opening. Standard moves are blitzed out from both sides in a rather peaceful beginning to what is a fierce match. Both the players' pieces jockeyed for position on the board throughout the game, with Magnus gaining a slight advantage and initiative from it. As the end of the game approached, both sides aimed to create an attack simultaneously, but they would both settle for a draw as they would just repeat moves. Putting a technical issue aside, the pair hop into their next battle. Magnus selected his reliable English opening, which managed to grant him a nice position. Using that, he began to get aggressive for an attack on Hans's king. Hans's pieces were, to his dismay, completely frozen on the wrong side of the board. And with Magnus's attack only growing to a very substantial amount of power, Hans was left to simply resign. Game 4 was more of the same, as the pair would play the exact same first 6 moves as in Game 2. The rest of the game would continue in a similar silhouette, with the pair eventually diverging. With the momentum he had built up in his previous games, Magnus began searching for yet another win. Suddenly, in a losing position, Hans tries to create chaos, which doesn't exactly impress Magnus. and trailing on time, Hans scrambles to defend the endgame, but ultimately cannot stop Magnus from making a second queen, and Niemann resigns. Both players got a well-deserved break as they hustled backstage after the bout that occurred. At this point, the trajectory of this match was clear. Magnus was here to send a message, and he was doing so in dominating fashion. Following their time to rest, Magnus brought back the English opening, which worked in Game 3. This time, however, instead of remaining peaceful, pieces are quickly traded all over the board, bringing us into an early endgame. With equal pawns and pieces on either side, the endgame is a theoretical draw. But for the first time in this match, Magnus shows weakness as he blunders a tactic and subsequently a bishop. However, while Hans is still converting this endgame, he begins to complain about issues with his computer, and impressively, with supposed issues and a lot of time pressure going on, Hans still manages to convert, leaving Magnus Carlsen to resign his first loss of the match. And after a pause in the match and some Hans complaining, the problems were seemingly resolved, and the players would return to play. Magnus's momentum and the circumstances of the match were clearly getting to Hans at this point, as he was behind 2 points and it would only get worse. Hans would play the same Italian opening in Game 6, and Magnus would win yet again. The next game would result in a draw, followed by Magnus winning the next 2, leaving Niemann to walk away deflated. And when the dust settled, Magnus would end the first portion of the match up 7-2. Magnus was up big, and Hans had quite the work to do if he even wanted a chance of coming back into this one. And when the players returned to their chairs, Magnus looked relaxed as ever, and Hans looked like he had just seen a ghost. Regardless, Hans went back again to the exact same variation of the Italian opening that he had been playing so many times in the match to little success. But contrary to those games, this one proved to be different as Hans grinded Magnus down to take his second win of the match. Despite a strong start to the new time control, Hans failed to capitalize on his momentum. Magnus would win the next game, and the pair would trade wins alongside getting 2 draws for the remainder of this portion. Hans had been able to keep up with Magnus here, and this portion ended 4-4. The only problem was that Magnus was still on top by 5 points, and didn't exactly need to gain anything from that section to win. Hans would need to win 5 more games than Magnus in the remaining 30 minutes of the match. His chances were looking very slim. And the bullet format didn't exactly seem to work in Hans' favor, as the first 3 games would end up in a victory on either side and a draw. Following this, Magnus would put the cherry on top of what was a dominant statement match by winning 5 consecutive games against Hans to bring the lead to 10 points. With the remaining time on the clock, Hans mathematically had no way to come back and the match was over. Magnus had gotten his revenge. Even with this loss, Hans still got a little consolation at the end by going on a 5-game winning streak of his own to stop the bleeding a bit. But in the middle of this winning streak, he wouldn't go out without complaining about the website and the server once more.
Now we've got A3 on the board.
And
What is going on?
what is 94?
Hans is saying it happened again.
You see this? Are you kidding me? You see the lag? It's like not my move. I can't see it, and I obviously 90 like. You're not watching? You like.
I don't know what's
It's such a joke. Like, how can you?
And at well past 1 a.m. local time, the match finally concluded in a victory for Magnus Carlsen, 17.5 to 12.5. After Niemann had talked so much before the game, and had made such a climb over the past couple months, just for Carlsen to do this. Magnus had effectively humbled Hans, with little resistance in front of over 100,000 people online. Magnus even found time in his post-game interview to talk about the game.
You experienced some of the issues that Hans was experiencing? I'm just curious about the conversations down here.
Yeah, I was experiencing the issue of blundering.
Oh, okay. Same issue.
Magnus also doubled down on his Lance Stevenson comparison on Twitter, by sharing a gift from the 2014 playoffs. This shows Lance Stephenson, who Magnus implicitly compared to Hans, trying to throw LeBron off his game by blowing in his ear. LeBron and his Miami Heat would ultimately go on to win the series one game later, just like Magnus would do to Hans. Magnus wasn't even the only one to do this to Hans, as he would fall to Hikaru Nakamura in the consolation match 21-9. In fact, Hans was humbled so badly, not just by Magnus, but also Hikaru, that his whole demeanor changed.
I'm obviously only 21, but you know, I think that the most important thing about to leave from this is that my main objection against, let's say, my critics in the chess world is that I just simply want the opportunity to play. So I'm glad that I qualified and I got to play. I'm not asking for special treatment. All I want is the chance to prove myself, and I'm appreciative of the lessons I've learned. Of course, I might not be the most respectful person, but I would hope that you appreciate what has been done to me, and I think it's time to leave that in the past and let the chess speak for itself.
In the end, let this be a lesson for all of you. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe.